Can the Troy Trojans repeat? It's Locked On Sunbelt.
You are Locked On Sunbelt, your daily podcast on the Sunbelt Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. I'm your host, Dave Schultz. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. All right, spring football practice is underway, and as I promised, we will talk spring football. We have the head coach of the defending Sunbelt champion, Troy Trojans, Jon Sumrall, talks about year two versus year one. He's got some new coaches that he's got to get in with the program that's just joined the program. And, he's got to replace Carlton Marshall on the defense. He's got to replace Jake Andrews on the O-line. And, of course, everybody wants to know about the quarterback. And obviously, Gunnar Watson coming back for another umpteenth year with Troy. And, does he have any competition heading in? All right, so we will talk right now with head coach of the Troy Trojans, Jon Sumrall. Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. I'm your host, Dave Schultz. We have the head coach of the reigning Sunbelt champions, Jon Sumrall, on from the Troy Trojans. Of course, Coach Sumrall, the Sunbelt Coach of the Year. Unfortunately for him, he set the standards 1 year, one Sunbelt championship. He was a Hail Mary away from a one-loss season, and that being to Ole Miss. Coach, thanks very much for hopping on. And time travels fast because it is spring practice already for the Trojans. How are you?
I'm doing great, Dave. I appreciate you having me. Yeah, we're doing well, man. We just had spring practice number 1 today, and we're right back in the swing of things.
It must be so much easier for a head coach when it's just football compared to trying to find a staff, although you seem to be doing that the last couple of days as well, and, trying to move a family, and now it can just be about football. What was the difference between spring practice on Tuesday compared to spring practice, 2022 when you had your first one?
Yeah, one thing, like you said, everybody was brand new. And we have had a couple of staff changes, but really a lot more continuity than change. And even through the changes we've had on staff, really have hired people that were from the same tree or connected in regards to teaching progression. So really, for me, personal stuff has slowed down because families moved, not a lot more stable in just regards. My kids are not adjusting to a new school. My wife's happier because we're not unpacking boxes, so that makes everything easier. But really, and know the roster top to bottom better. Now, I did know the roster fairly well last year. The biggest difference was last year we had a very veteran roster this time of year, which allowed me to maybe focus a little bit more just on the details of football than normal for a first-year head coach. Where this year our systems are much more in place. I'm much more prepared to do my job at a high level, but we have a lot of new players, a lot of new faces, and maybe it's a very different looking team than last year's team just because there are so many new guys.
Oh, see, I would have had that backwards. It was very simple last year because you were new and just trying to, make sure everyone communicated right. It feels like you're doing it the opposite that I would have thought, that in year two, because you have so many new guys, dumbing down is not the right phrase, but yeah, just trying to keep things a little simple and easier as they ease into spring ball.
Yeah, and we've got a good group, a good mixture. There are some veterans. I mean, obviously, offensively, Gunnar and Kamani are two very veteran players. Grant Betts on our O-line, a very veteran player. And then defensively, Del Pettis, Richard Jubinor, Javon Solomon. There's some pieces that return that are very veteran, but those are mixed with a lot of new faces as well. And so I believe in the spring you're always trying to evaluate who belongs where and what seats on your roster in regards to what's their best position to play. And then worried about teaching fundamentals and techniques at times and then just your base scheme. So last year was a very, very veteran team, like I said, and everything we were doing systems-wise was new. Now our systems are very in place, but the roster is a lot different maybe.
How much easier it is on you and a head coach to have some of those veteran guys back to let them know, their teammates, the transfers, and maybe the early enrollees, what's expected. It's different coming from a player than it is coming from a coach.
Without question. Last year, even though we had a fairly veteran, productive returning roster, everything we were asking them to do was so new and so foreign, where even with the amount of turnover that we've had, just because we had a very senior-laden team last year, the returners are really leading the charge on a lot of the progression of how we teach things and the flow of practice and meetings and those sort of things. And what's fun for me as a head coach is, we're morning practice, and we got off the field this morning at 10 o'clock. But then guys are out of class. And before I came in here to do this with you, I'm walking down the hall and there's guys, on their own coming in to watch tape of practice today. And that's when you've got a good culture, is when guys want to be around the building, even when you're not asking them to. They just show back up because they want to get better. That's one thing I think that our returning players do a really nice job of reinforcing what the work standards look like here. What having a passion for getting better and improving your craft looks like.
Talking to Jon Sumrall, head coach of the Troy Trojans, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. I'm your host, Dave Schultz. What's the difference in spring practice in this new era of the transfer portal?
Yeah, you add the pieces you add, and I think trying to figure out probably more than spring practice, I think just holistically off-season wide, from when January all the way to the season, it's about building cohesion and chemistry amongst your team. I think obviously the buzzword in all of athletics and maybe in the entire world is culture, right? Right. It's making sure that guys understand what the standards of our program look like, and making sure that we do have connectivity and engagement with our team. We do a lot. We're very intentional with making sure that our team knows each other. And when you have so many new faces and so many new guys, some may be out of the portal, some may be junior college transfers, and some high school mid-year guys that we've got here, I think the importance of getting people connected to where they are a part of the team and they care deeply about each other cannot be understated. That's probably as important as spring practice and getting the defense, offense, and kicking game installed. I think that's just as important as well.
Do you tweak things? Because people, like the Raging Cajuns and South Alabama are going to know the Jon Sumrall systems. How do you tweak things not to get stale?
You're constantly tweaking. I told, we finished, I think, top 10 in the country in scoring defense. There are 1,000 things that I'm still not pleased with how we did last year on defense. I think we can get better. I mean,
oh man.
And so, and we could still have an improvement and maybe not be 8th or 7th in the country in scoring defense. Who knows? Mm-hmm. We'll see how that shakes out. But there's a lot of areas where we could teach better as coaches. That includes myself. I mean, we can teach things better than we taught last year. And I think we can clean some things up. You're always adapting. You're always evolving. No 2 years are the same roster-wise or schematically. Are your base foundational pieces in regards to what you do schematically in place? Sure. But there's a lot of things that we have to improve upon in all three phases of the game, from a teaching progression and just the execution and how we're doing it. And so I think you're constantly evolving. I think if you stay the same, you get passed by without question. And so we're retweaking, recalibrating, retooling everything we do constantly.
All right, let's take a time out. We'll come back more with head coach of the Troy Trojans, Jon Sumrall. He will talk how he goes about using and dealing with a depth chart so early on in the spring. But first, let me tell you about FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt. Let's get back to our conversation with the head coach of the Troy Trojans, Jon Sumrall. Specifically on the defense, you're going to have to figure out on how to do that without the quarterback on the defense. Everybody's favorite, Carlton Marshall. Who's first up to try and fill those huge shoes?
Yeah, so Jade McDonald's coming off of an injury. He got hurt in the third game of the year last year against App State. He'll be back this fall. And then Jordan Stringer, who played some last year for us. When Carlton missed a couple of games, Carlton was out the App State game, and he was out the Louisiana Monroe game, and he was limited in a couple other games, to be quite honest with you. He was beat up some last year. Jordan played a decent amount, and so those are the first two guys. And we really got several new additions in our linebacker room right now that are going through spring practice. Stephen Catledge is a junior college All-American. He was ranked a top 10 player in junior college football coming out last year by many of the recruiting industry people. He is a very impressive kid physically and athletically. He's all of 6'2". He's about 225 pounds, and he runs really well. And so he went out today with the ones at Mike. At Will, Terry Thomas is a returner who played a lot of football in Carlton's absence as well last year. So we've got the three guys that played right behind Carlton and KJ, all three of them back. And then we've got a lot of guys we've added to the mix that I think, this is an important spring for that position to identify who's ready to step up and take on some of that load.
Every coach's favorite question: when do you like to have a depth chart? Whether we find out about it, when do you personally, do you have a depth chart following spring? And then, because you got to start somewhere when the fall practice starts, when do you like to have that?
We had a depth chart today. We go out to first spring practice. Somebody's with the ones and somebody's with the twos and somebody's with the threes. And you get what you earn. In our program, when I took the job a year ago, I had great history with Carlton. Carlton wasn't promised anything when I took the job. He was told, hey, you're going to have to come in and work to earn that you're still the starting will. Now, I think Mike, you probably will, but you have to earn it. And nobody's giving anything. Just like Gunner started 12 games last year at quarterback for us. He still has to come in and handle his business the right way to be the starting quarterback. Nobody's given anything in this game or in life. And so we have a depth chart daily. Some guys that went with the ones today will go to Thursday's practice. Some guys that went with the twos, they might elevate. The depth chart around here is written in sand. Just like you go to the beach and write something in the sand, the water washes over the next day, and you get what you earn. It's a performance-based deal, and guys that perform at a high level, they elevate. Guys that don't, they maybe get exposed. And so we push guys to go earn what you get. Nobody's giving anything, and I believe in a depth chart all the time. It's constant. You're constantly trying to earn more or get more, and if you want it, go get it. Go take it. It's there for the taking.
Can I tell Josh Botwell it's coming every day?
Well, I don't know that I'll issue one out every day to the media. Josh does a tremendous job, man. He's outstanding. Him and John Johnson both are a lot of our practices. Josh, obviously the Troy Messenger, and John Johnson down in Dothan do a great job covering our program and our team. Extremely grateful for what they do. They will not be getting a depth chart daily. No, I love them both dearly. I will not be each day at practice they show up handing them a new depth chart.
It could be information overload. You could look at it that way. They may not be able to keep up.
They would be extremely confused about how many changes we made daily trying to figure out what we were thinking. But a lot of it's just, we move guys around the O-line just so you can cross-train positionally, so much like Jake Andrews last year. If he'd have come to practice, he had never played center until last spring. Well, now he's about to get drafted as a center, and probably wouldn't be getting drafted if he didn't move to center. And so we move guys around to put them in different positions to try to figure out what gives us the best chance to put our best 11 on the field in every situation scenario. But it could be information overload if we gave them one every day.
It is Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. I'm your host, Dave Schultz. We're talking with the head coach of the Troy Trojans, Jon Sumrall. That in the business is called segue, because everyone always wants to talk quarterback, but, football's not as difficult as maybe people like to make it out to be, but it all starts on the lines, and one of the guys you're going to have to replace, you named him, is Jake Andrews. Who's up to that task?
Yeah, we've brought in several new offensive linemen. We've got some returners that we think will be able to compete for the job. Jake, a year ago this time, I knew Jake was a good player because I had been here when we recruited him previously. But last summer even, I'd get phone calls from NFL scouts, and nobody was asking me about Jake Andrews. I mean, not nobody. And they were asking me about some other guys, but not Jake. And now Jake's about to become a draft pick and went to the Senior Bowl and was at the Combine, and really a cool story of just what last year's development, and what he made of his opportunities. I think we've got some guys that maybe aren't household names yet that have a chance to elevate and improve their role. We've got Eli Russ, who is a transfer from Oklahoma State, who started a couple games there at center last year. Eli's with us, and I think he's got a lot of things that resemble the style of play that Jake played with. He's very tough and physical. He's a blue-collar, hard-nosed guy. And then several other guys are going to get their go at center. We roll guys around so much on the O-line. You may play center for a rack of snaps, and you may play guard and left tackle to right tackle. We move guys around just to cross-train them and get as much position flexibility and versatility as possible. But excited to see. We ask all of our linemen to snap. So we make all of them snap some. That doesn't mean they're all going to play center every day, but we require that they snap just because it's a trait that adds value to each one of them individually if they can do it for here and for later. And so we get them all to work on snapping. That doesn't mean they're all going to practice at center every day.
Also, just in case of an emergency situation as well. Yeah. That's a good idea. Yeah.
No doubt. We make all of them work on snapping to some degree. Maybe not some guys that play center down in, down out, obviously working on a ton. But we ask all our guys to do some snapping just so that there's some flexibility there.
All right, before we get to the quarterback, a couple more questions for Jon Sumrall, Troy Trojans head coach. We did mention you brought in a couple of coaches late. I think you brought in a defensive coordinator and an offensive line coach. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Greg Gasparato, our defensive coordinator, came to us. He was at Louisville the last 2 years. I coached against him when I was at Kentucky. Greg was the safeties coach in 2021 at Louisville and the outside linebackers coach in 2022. He had gone with Scott Satterfield to Cincinnati. And then when Coach Wood left to go from here, I gave Greg a call. I've known Greg or followed him for quite a while. Greg was at App State 2018 and 19 as the safeties coach. Prior to that, and in 2020, he was at Army as the co-DC and safeties coach. Well, when he was at Nate Woody, long time at App State, Nate Woody's the DC at Army. Gasparato was the co-DC and safeties coach. And then Sheil Wood, who was our DC last, was the linebackers coach there at the time. And then Greg left Army to go to Louisville. And when Greg left to go to Louisville, that's when Sheil became the co-DC and safeties coach. He filled Greg's void at Army. So just like a few years ago, Sheil took Greg's job. Now Greg's taking Sheil's job. So very, very similar structure of what we've already been doing is what he's been around. There's some things that they did at Louisville that are a little bit different than what we did here last year that I liked and wanted to bring in. They led the country in sacks. They were really good defensively from a statistics standpoint. And I heard Greg present several years ago down at Baylor, right when Dave Aranda got the job at Baylor, and a bunch of 3-4 guys were down there clinicking. And Greg spoke at that clinic, and I'll never forget. I was sitting with our staff at Kentucky, and I'm talking to one of the guys I worked with. I'm like, man, this guy's really good. Like, this is very detailed and well thought out. And so as a coach, you're always looking around like, all right, who does things in a way I really respect? Greg's always been one of those guys that I've just kind of tracked and thought very highly of. And he's come from the same system and family of defense that we've been running. So very seamless, natural transition right there. Terminology-wise, what they did at Louisville is basically the same terminology we used here last year to some degree. And then offensive line, obviously Cole Popovich, our offensive line coach, went to go be with the Houston Texans. And I told our staff, hey, if anytime we lose staff guys in the NFL, I'm good. Like I'm not worried. Like, that's a good problem to have. Just like we want our players to go to the NFL. If our coaches are getting NFL opportunities, that bodes well about what we have here. And I think that attracts other coaches. The number of people that reached out to me on both of those jobs, the DC job and the O-line job, I was just blown away with the amount of interest. And we hired Joe Bernardi. Joe, similar to how Greg and Shield had history, Joe played at Fresno State with Cole Popovich, who was our last O-line coach. Joe was the starting center at Fresno when Cole started at guard. And Joe started 32 games at Fresno, was on the Remington Ward a watch list twice as a player in college. His father, Gary, was a longtime O-line coach in college football. He'd coached at USC and UCLA and a bunch of places. I've known Joe a long time, going back to probably 2007 or 8. Joe had got done playing at Fresno, coached at Tennessee and at Oregon as a GA or an analyst, and then got hired to be the when he left Tennessee and Oregon, he went to Fresno State as the tight ends coach. Then he was at San Jose State as the O-line coach. And then he was last at Auburn. He got hired there by Brian Harsin. And then Hugh Freeze kept him. And, everybody I'd already known about Joe for years. Cole and him had a great relationship, who was our last O-line coach. So there was history there. Joe, everybody I talked to, even obviously I interviewed several guys to get to know him. But Joe, everybody that was around him just raves about him. And then getting him here and seeing his energy and his work ethic and how he interacts with the players and the staff, you can see why, because he's got great energy, a really good football coach who comes, like I said, his dad was a longtime college O-line coach. So excited about both additions. I'm happy for the guys that have left our program to go have good opportunities for themselves and their families, and fired up about who we added. Could not be more thrilled about where our staff sits right now. I love the staff we've got and believe in what they're doing.
If this football coaching thing doesn't work out, you can become a football coach's agent, because you know those guys' resumes down pat.
Well, man, just like I study the game and I study players, man, I study coaches too. I follow people and what they do and how they do it. And I'm very, Dave, I believe there's a football fit with the staff, but I also believe in guys fitting the culture of what we're doing in regards to our families and our program. There's a fit that I'm looking for, that I want guys to have energy. I want guys that treat people the right way, that are great to be around daily and that make our players better and add value to their lives. And so I think I'm probably over the top detailed on digging in to make sure I know exactly who we're hiring.
All right, let's take one more time out. We'll be back with more with head coach of the Troy Trojans, Jon Sumrall. He will talk about his returning quarterback, Gunnar Watson, and everybody else in the Troy Trojans quarterback room. But want to thank you again, continuing to grow. This is the Sunbelt, Locked On Sunbelt podcast. We've had almost 50% growth in terms of subscribers, so please continue to subscribe. It is a big help to me and to the podcast. Again, the more people that watch, the better chance that I have to get good guests on to let you know what's going on in the Sun Belt. So thanks so much. Please go to YouTube. And if you see it on Twitter or Facebook, please like and share it. It is a big help as the podcast is continuing to grow. All right, let's go back to our conversation and wrap things up with head coach of the Troy Trojans, Jon Sumrall, talking about his quarterback, Gunnar Watson. All right, to wrap things up here with Jon Sumrall, let's talk about your veteran quarterback. A couple of veteran quarterbacks had good years last year. Stetson Bennett, Hendon Hooker, they can both rent cars, being 25 years of age. Gunnar Watson is pretty close to that. He had an up-and-down season, starter coming in, had a huge third-down conversion against the South Alabama Jaguars, had a huge ball game in the Sun Belt Championship, made a big-time touchdown throw coming from behind in the bowl game. Tell us about him and how last year affected him and who his competition may be this season.
Yeah, Gunner has had a great offseason. To be honest with you, a year ago this time, I told him, I said, man, you've got to change the way you're doing some things or you're not going to last on this roster. And I was very candid with him. And he's put in a great amount of work. He had, like you said, he had some good moments last year and maybe some not so good moments. But he's a tough kid who's a fighter, who's a leader. And our team rallies behind him and around him and has done so. Much to what you said earlier, everything's earned. Gunner did start a lot of football games last year, and he's getting first crack at the job right now. But we're constantly trying to figure out how can we get better. Gunner, since January, returning from the bowl game, he has changed his body. He is currently in the off-season winter drills. This will surprise some people, but like we do a matchup deal where you compete against a different person all day in some running drills. And I'm not going to name any names, but a couple weeks ago, he beat one of our running backs that day.
Oh.
And it was as a player that's played a little bit here at running back. And so he has elevated what he's doing. He's changed his weightlifting stuff. He's, I think, recommitted in the weight room. His nutrition and his diet, I think, has changed dramatically to give himself an opportunity to grow to become his best. And I really believe that Gunner has been through a lot of things here. He's been the starter. He's not been the starter. He's been the backup. He's beaten somebody out. He's been beat out. He's been in so many different roles that nothing really phases him. He just kind of is steady Eddie in regards to how he approaches things. But Gunner's been a great leader this offseason and really worked hard at his craft. And then in the quarterback room, the scholarship guys we've got Goose Crowder, who transferred from West Virginia, who's from Gardendale. We've got Quade Hawkins, who's from Bainbridge, Georgia. We've got Tucker Kilcrease, who's from right down the road in Brantley, who Tucker had a really good fall practice last year, and we decided to redshirt him, but he was in the mix for being the backup until we brought Jarrett Dagey in. And then we've got J.D. Sherrod, who's a true freshman who we signed out of Memphis, Tennessee. And then another young man we got on our roster right now that is a dang good player. It's a walk-on, but Jamison Holcomb, he's Kelly Holcomb's son who played quarterback in the NFL and from Middle Tennessee. Jamison has put on about 20 pounds since getting here, and he's got a lot of intangibles that I really like. So that room right now, just from a competitive nature standpoint, is totally different than the room we had here a year ago. The room we had here a year ago, I did not think was competitive enough top to bottom. I did not know that we had the depth to win games with multiple guys. Right. I really believe in what we've got in that room. I think those guys are all talented in their own right, but I also believe they're all hungry and competitive and driven to get better and improving daily while also supporting each other. They're competing with each other, not against each other. And I think we had a tremendous example of that here last year with Gunner and with Jarrett. Those guys handled everything with each other with class and were each other's biggest cheerleader and fan and supporter. And that's what we expect of that quarterback room. I'm excited about what we have in there and think the future is really bright with the guys that we've got.
He's Jon Sumrall, a reigning Sunbelt Coach of the Year, reigning Sunbelt champion. He's the head coach of the Troy Trojans. Thanks so much. Very generous with your time, Coach, and I hope to catch up again. Thanks for hopping on Locked On Sunbelt.
Dave, thanks for having me, and thanks for everything you do for Sunbelt football, man. Grateful for your coverage.
I'm going over all of the resumes for all of your coaches. I'll be ready next time.
I love it. You can quiz me and see if you can stump me on where they've been.
Yes, I will. Absolutely. Thanks, Coach.
All right. See you, Dave.